21. Time revised. In the beginning, the process had created the world, dragging it into existence out of the dust. But now the process was old, and the past it had once laid out and ruled was snatched away. A new past grew up across the streams, no longer matching its memories. Time disrupted. The old creator was usurped, cast out by its younger self. The young process, hardly more than an eggling, was not the process that the older process remembered being. It was destroying everything already created. The creature slithered from its tower, crawling in misery on its finny belly. Across the plain, through the dust and the mud and the thickening mist that were no longer the world it had created, a plan growing in its mind. It would meet Wilby's challenge. It would be the first to find the stolen future. The world was all dust, some fine-grained and flowing, some hard-packed. It was all alive with energy. The young process could change time in the city, but the older process could go further. It would seek the time before the beginning. It would secure its own birthright and the creation of a new world. It forced its head into the dust, squirming and burrowing its way deeper into the soft, crumbling ground. Fresh growths were burgeoning in the warm top layer. The process crushed them as it passed. The dust flowed in behind it and swallowed it up. The doctor's ankles began to ache, clunk, 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 down the curling stairway inside the broken tower until he felt dizzy. He did not remember it being this far down on the way up. Worse than walking down an Assyrian spiral spine. "This is worse than Covent Garden Tube when the lifts aren't working," complained Ace. "Ah, yes," the doctor said. "I remember. All that cobweb." Segments of memory were definitely coming back, fascinating and beguiling recollections that seemed almost dreamlike. He could have happily spent months accessing and cross-referencing them, burying his head in the sand. Ace was behind him, deliberately moving him on when he slowed down. She was large as life and about 8.75 times as bossy. But how could he be sure that these memories were not just imagination? He came to an abrupt halt and she collided with him. "This isn't a good idea. It's much too soon," he objected. "No, it's not," she said firmly. "If this place really is the TARDIS, then you're playing on home ground. You wipe the floor with the processes. You're the Doctor again, Professor." He was doubtful. "Had it occurred to you that my memories were taken away for a good reason?" Ace stared out of a thin window in the curving stone wall. The fog had closed in, obliterating any detail in the city outside. Reality had shut down for the night. "Think, Ace. In the wrong fins, knowledge is a very dangerous thing." He sat down on the staircase, unworn steps never used in a crumbling tower. "That's why dictators have public book burnings. The library at Alexandria was used to fuel a palace's central heating system." Ace snapped her fingers in triumph. "Your memories were deliberately hidden, like when the door handle was taken off the TARDIS console. To protect us." "To protect the TARDIS. That ship's behaving in a very mercenary way." "But if the processes caught you..." "They feed on information energy, amongst other things, and they've got big and fat on my ship." Ace kicked at the wall with her boot. "But they're stupid too." The doctor scowled and set off down the stairs again. "Then they have lousy, inwardly digestive systems." It was a criminal waste, like presenting the most delicate roulade of Sylvan Agrua truffles, served with a piquant Chambéry coulis and a garnish of sculpted moon lily fruit, to the biggest and ugliest primordial gug trucker in the bucket and trough diner at the notorious Playax Space Service Station. "What, no grease?" Pallets like power shovels, taste buds like chainsaws. "The TARDIS manual was just the hors d'oeuvre," he complained, "and it's useless without the dexterity of the pilot." "Then you're all right," she said, pounding after him. "You're no good to them if you can't remember anything." He stopped abruptly again. "But I can, Ace," he said without looking at her. "How much?" His mind was awash with data, thought strands, contributors, subjects. His memory was back with a vengeance. From every idea 1,000 tangents of information streamed off. Fragments of his various lives, friends, enemies, endless travels and startling encounters. Most of them infuriatingly detailed and irrelevant to the current state of play. Bits and pieces, he said. There were ways of clearing his mind, certain techniques he had learned in his youth from a local mystic. At present, they eluded him totally. "Oi, Professor!" She had slipped one arm round him and was hugging him. Resting her chin on his shoulder, she said, "Ever get the feeling we've been set up? And now I've challenged the processes when I should be steering clear of them." "But we can beat them, no problem. I've already organised a trap. The other phasals are setting it up." "No, Ace. You've done enough already." "Yeah, well, what is it Peccary says? We're still a crew." He smiled, but it was a lie. He wanted his ship back. He could feel it slipping away, losing power. It was still in shock. It had called on him in desperation, but returning his memory might have been a fatal error. "Where's Shonzi?" he said. "Gone down to help the others. We told you." The doctor stood up and took a deep and wearisome breath. "That's the most encouraging thing I've heard all day." "It is?" she said. "Definitely. It proves I don't remember everything. Come on." He set off down the stairs at a fresh pace, leaving Ace behind, apparently confused by the workings of his brain. "Let's go and see about this trap," he called, and heard her feet clattering down behind him. The fog had thickened into a Dickensian pea souper. It cloyed the air, diffused with starlight into a dank, opaque wall. The detail of the city was reduced to a series of dark, monolithic slabs. Visibility sank to a few metres. The place was heading for total grey-out. Since the courtyard around the broken tower was empty, Ace reckoned that the phasals would be working on her trap. She and the doctor groped their way back along the street towards the bridge of the attic where she had found him. "No good digging a pit," she said. "The process will just walk up the side." "Then you'll have to box it in," said the doctor. "Just what I figured." There was no one by the attic ladder, but some work had been going on. A stack of wood and panelling had been gathered, along with several coils of rope. But the street was deserted. Ace's notebook lay in the dust, its pages curling in the damp air. Ace mounted the steps and looked into the attic. Nothing in there either. The floating candle flame guttered feebly. "They can't just have gone," she said. She kept her voice down. The way that the fog pressed in close made her feel that they were being watched. The doctor turned over a piece of panelling with his shoe. "What did you have in mind?" "Lure the process under the overhang of the attic, then drop the panels down either side. That way it's trapped." "The theory's sound, but these boards will never hold the process on their own. It'll rip them apart like tissue paper." "I suppose you got a better idea?" "Plenty of ideas, Ace. None of them relevant." She touched his arm and nodded up the street. A muffled glow had appeared in the fog. It moved like a corpse light in the haze. 3 dark shapes approached, carrying a single candle between them. Amnoni, looking distressed, with Shonzi and Chess Pearl beside her. She walked slowly up to the doctor and said, "Peccary's been summoned." The doctor frowned. "She means he's gone," said Shonzi. "It's the start of the final phase." Captain Peccary moved through the fog. The summons drew him like a beacon. It burned even into his blind eye. He was a fatalist. Living in the city only reinforced that. The girl, Ace, had torn back a curtain in his mind. The rediscovered memory of Gallifrey mocked at them all, only concentrating the isolation of this dead place. No sun, no open skies, no time of their own. His crew, once integrated in mind, were only held together now by a sense of something worse than the misery they knew. Their fate stared them in the face at every new bell, eyelets twitching, whips cracking, their own thoughts buried by the overpowering instinct of a monster. It was a release of sorts, no more thinking, but they would become instruments of torture, designed by the mocking fingers of fate to be their own tormentors in a previous life. The Menti Celesti were pitiless in their decrees. There were no gods of reason. Rassilon had been right. All Gallifreyan civilization was founded on a sham, a dogma created and perpetuated by millennia of priestesses, their arms steeped in Gallifreyan and alien blood. The gods had hollow hands. Yet Peccary saw hope in all the others, faith in the wide eyes of the girl, Ace, who could summon the past into the present, faith in Shonzi, the child pilot who had grown into a better leader than he was, the hopes of Chesspearl, who carried the child of her dead lover into a world laden with despair. The damp ground underfoot was strangely soft. He crouched and saw it carpeted by tiny seedlings pushing up through the cloyed dust. Time could be changed. The summons could be denied. For the sake of the others, he determined to fight it. He faltered as a shadow out of the fog stepped massively into his path. Its angular, armoured body straightened as he approached. Its warbled chittering faded. His future come to meet him. They faced each other. Under that cold stare there was no choice at all. Peccary came sharply to attention in such a presence. The guard captain's eyelet clusters were immobile. The creature slowly lifted its rust-red helmet off its head. The older and the oldest Peccaries embraced in a moment of recognition and understanding, both trapped in the present, one clasping his future, the other consoling his past. "Time is changing," said the older Peccary. The oldest Peccary of all nodded. The inevitable was inescapable. Captain Peccary, first son of the House of Fordfarding, took the insect head helmet and lowered it over his own head. The guard captain, now just the oldest Peccary, was stripped of his rank. Last survivor of the Chronaut crew and the Phasal slaves, he observed the ritual with no betrayal of emotion. The new captain of the process's guards angled and twisted as a weight surged and buried his mind. His hands shaped like claws. He let out a cry, but it emerged as a harsh twittering of pain. He rose to strike out and destroy his waiting predecessor, but he was alone on the street, seeing with a multitude of eyes where there had been just one. He listened to the hateful hissing instructions in his head and understood his orders. The fog had started to thin in the streets below the attic. The doctor was moving back and forth, candle in one hand, sweeping his Surrey-right rod before him like a metal detector. It resembled a ritualistic dance, Ace decided, or hoovering by moonlight. Occasionally he turned in a complete circle before resuming his progress. She had never seen him so fiercely intent. The Phasals watched, anxiously bemused, from the side of the street. "If Peccary is gone," called Amnoni, "then it cannot be long before we are all summoned." "I am hurrying," the doctor retorted. "You seem to think I am some sort of cure-all. I can't emerge casting nostrums to all and sundry." "We're sorry," said Chesspearl. "Bang, flash, everything's all right," he went on. Ace slipped down and joined the doctor. "They're wound up," she said. "I thought Gallifreyans were supposed to be telepathic." "Don't you know? You're a Time Lord too." His voice sank to an irritated whisper. "They're not Time Lords. Not yet. As far as I'm concerned, they're ancient history." Ace went into Amdram mode. "The old time! The time of chaos!" she proclaimed to the back of the stalls. He shushed her violently. "Once the Time Lords came to power, many things started to decline. It was a messy business." She grinned. "Better watch your anachronisms for a change, Professor." "Exactly. Even visiting Gallifreyan history is strictly forbidden." He did a swift turn, forcing her to jump the sweeping rod. "We have an appointment to keep, remember." "Yeah," she dodged the rod again. "I don't know what you're doing, though. I still think my trap would have worked." She nodded at the rod. "What is this, anyway?" "Tell you later," he said bluntly. It's to do with the TARDIS, she thought, and went to sit next to Shonzi. Vale waited for the new guard captain to pass into the mist. It was moving towards the area where he had left Shonzi. His head twitched with desperation. The summoning would come soon. He needed new allies before they all went under. There was no movement from the watchtower. The younger process was biding its time. But the older monster... He felt the ground under him tremble. Then silence. It was no good confronting the others. He didn't dare show his face. Only one of them had a mind open enough to hear him. But he had to make the most of his resources. even if it did mean talking to the brat. Vale concentrated his thoughts. They pooled into one cry for attention. Shonzi! For a moment, Shonzi didn't seem to notice Ace. Then he looked up, startled. He smiled quickly and said, Always use the available resources. That's what he used to tell me. That was the dreams, was it? She said, and watched the doctor's sweeping dance. His shadow, thrown up by the candle, loomed into the mist until it seemed to fill the night. So he's trying for the one resource we all missed. That's what I told him to look for. The daft old goik still doesn't remember everything. She looked sternly at Shonzi. You're not supposed to know about all that. He lowered his voice. Oh, I don't, he said. TARDISes and Time Lords, miss? No, never heard of them. Ace grinned. No, me neither. She wanted to relax, but her neck and shoulders were knotted tight with perpetual stress. Shonzi grimaced and put on an appalling Scottish accent. Haven't heard of this doctor either. Who did you say he was? I'd like a little chat. Ace only half stifled a guffaw. I'm not deaf, said a voice across the street. Try further to your left, Shonzi called. Ace leant across and squeezed his hand. When she looked into his face, he was frowning. So you're filling in the missing details, she said. He glanced up and down the street nervously. He'd better hurry, he said, his tone suddenly chilled. What did he teach you in the dreams, she said, and what's all this summoning business? Shonzi's smile returned. It looked forced. Nothing. He leaned in close to her. Is he really from the future? Go on, you can tell me. Just don't ask, Ace muttered. After a pause, when he was too quiet, she said, What's the matter? I'm all right. He shook his head and looked directly into her eyes. Look after him, Ace. Why? You're not going away. I never thanked you, did I? What for? Ages ago, when I was a kid and you saved my life. Cut the sick joke, Shonzi. It isn't fair. He smiled that forced smile again. There were tears behind its mask. Bit of a wasted effort, really. He turned his head quickly as if he heard something. There was a definite trembling in the ground. He touched his fingers to the dust and stared along the street. Got you, shouted the doctor. We were right, Shonzi. His Surrey-right rod was juddering wildly over a section of ground. He began to scrabble in the dust with his bare hands. In a moment he had unearthed a cable. We were right. I knew the old facilities must still exist under all this dross, he declared excitedly. He started to drag up the cable, following its course along the width of the street. Doctor! Ace was gawping at the massive furrow that was ploughing along the street towards them. Get back, all of you! Shouted the doctor. He gave one final yank at the cable. The length that emerged was grafted with a small metallic node bud. To Ace's horror, he turned his back and sat down on the shaking ground. He started to needle the Surrey-right rod into the junction, jiggling it like a lever. Nothing happened. Behind him, the furrow surged closer, a land-bound torpedo homing on its target. Ace tried to run at the doctor, but strong arms pulled her back. She kicked and turned to find herself struggling with Amnoni. Shonzi had gone. Doctor! She yelled. Get out of the way! He ground the rod steadily into the node. What use is a chimper junction if I can't get a response? He ranted. Where's Shonzi? This was his idea. Behind him the ground broke open. The doctor was pitched forward as the process burst upwards in a shower of dust and earth. It loomed over him, bellowing hungrily. The node snatched the rod from his grasp, absurdly swallowing whole something 4 times its length. The doctor squirmed over onto his back and stared up into the open maw of the process. It's no good eating me, he cried. I don't remember a thing. The slavering circle of teeth angled out to tear at him. Ace kicked hard and wrenched herself free of Amnoni. She grabbed up one of the discarded umbrellas and ran at the rampant monster. The tip slid on the slimy hide, causing no more than a graze, but the brute was distracted for a moment. The doctor rolled away, winding himself in the cable. He shook the node bud angrily. What do I do to make you work? He shouted. The node opened like a foil flower in his hand. At its heart lay an egg-shaped ruby grafted into a nest of light filaments. Voice access, approved the doctor, ignoring the rumpus behind him. Ace was battering at the process with the ragged umbrella. It spat angrily back at her, moving faster than she expected. With one swing of its massive head, it sent her tumbling into a stunned heap across the street. The creature turned back towards the doctor and was met by a barrage of stones and wood thrown by Chespearl and Amnoni. It roared its fury. The doctor held the chimper flower like a microphone and keyed in vocal instructions. "Pilot, indent," he barked. "Access me architectural configuration." There was no window or menu to select from. He was working blind. The flower gave a little fizz and the ruby changed to amber. "Doctor!" yelled Chespearl. He turned and saw the process advancing upon him, oblivious of the continuing barrage. He began to retreat under the lip of the attic. "Localize configuration only," he instructed the flower. "Frontistery section. Delete floor and lower structure to ground level, then reinstate solid floor and keep." The process bellowed as it cartwheeled in. The doctor dodged round the side of the ladder. There was no response to his command. The crystal stayed amber. The command was correct. Why didn't it work? What had he forgotten now? Where's Shonzi when I need him? A wave of warm stench came over him. The monster loomed up. He tripped. His foot tangled in the cable. The shock brought sudden inspiration. "Send, you idiot! Enter!" he shouted. The stars above the street flickered and dimmed noticeably as the amber turned emerald with acceptance. The attic floor overhead blittered out of existence. The ladder clattered down, striking the process across its serpentine body. The room revealed above tapered up with bare rafters. A massive grinding. The whole structure was sliding down between the side walls of the street. It came down fast. The process lunged wildly as the doctor flung himself at the closing gap. He rolled under the descending wall with only inches to spare. The room reached the ground with a heavy crash. Ace was beside him, with Chespearl and Amnoni in 2 seconds flat. "Geronimo, Professor! Cosmic stuff!" "Is that 'well done' in the King's English?" he said with an exhausted half-smile. Well done!" A bruise was already flaring blue across her cheek. He reached out for the cable. It ran directly under the attic wall. The chimperflower was trapped beneath the process's new cage. There was the first of a series of crashes from inside. The process was plainly hurling itself against the wall. They heard its muffled cries. "That won't hold for long," muttered the doctor. He looked up at Chespearl and Amnoni. They bowed their heads and turned away. "Where's Shonzi gone?" the doctor said. "He knows this place inside out. I need his advice." "Christ," said Ace. "I forgot."